This is Half-Life 2 RTX, being what Half-Life 2 would look like using path tracing. This means real-time lighting and reflections on everything, as well as revamped models and textures, the addition of full DLSS upscaling support, and much more fog. Would this be how Half-Life 2 would have looked were it released today? Probably not. Rather boringly, I'd say that Half-Life 2, where it made today, would look something like Half-Life Alyx, being Source 2 based and with a slightly more cartoonish art style which Valve seems to favour these days. Without the overhead of VR, they may have dared to lavish more detail into their environments, but Valve has never strived to make their games particularly demanding on hardware. Unlike this, which looks to be the full works, using all the latest cutting-edge graphical effects in a bid to be the most technically advanced version of Half-Life ever made. But under the hood, it'll still be the same old Half-Life 2 levels and gameplay, which I have no problem with. I love any excuse to be able to boot this game up into play through it again. The team behind it has said that they're making adjustments where they think it benefits the new graphical effects, like by adding real windows to buildings and stuff, in order to allow lighting to pass through more realistically. They're also going above and beyond by touching up some of the sound effects and animations. At this point, the path tracing speaks for itself. Everything will be lit and reflected in real time, which when combined with new PBR materials will look gorgeous. Though despite being 20 years old at this point, Half-Life 2's visuals hold up rather well, thanks to how that game used cleverly pre-calculated path-traced lighting back in the day. Of course, there were limitations to this. The Source engine didn't bounce much coloured lighting about the place when compared with, say, Source 2. Counter-Strike 2 has seen otherwise identical maps suddenly become much brighter and more colourful with nothing but improved Source 2 lighting added to them. And we can see that a few surfaces in this new RTX version now sport a lot more bounce lighting than they did before. So expect Half-Life 2 RTX to have much more colourful environments, due to it bleeding colours into each other more seamlessly.
But in whom no light may be found.
Another downside with the old baked-in lighting was that it tended to have quite a low resolution. In Half-Life 2 you can sometimes make out quite pixelated looking areas, but this low quality lighting generally manifests itself in the form of muddy looking light to dark transitions. Of course, all this will now look much nicer now fully path traced. And it's nice to see the ugly basic shadows of Source 1 now swapped out for much more dramatic, unified looking real-time ones, which I'm sure Ravenholm will use to great effect, especially in conjunction with all the zombies waddling about and the fire effects you can turn on and off in real time. DLSS 3.5 is also supported, being the ray reconstruction feature, which swaps out the old manual denoising techniques for an AI-powered one, which is much faster to respond to changes in lighting and helps to construct accurate reflections and shadows from less information, but it can sometimes appear to over-sharpen stuff, like you can see on these grass blades. I mean, previously all these overlapping details were a fuzzy, shimmering mess, so it's fixed that seemingly unsolvable problem, but it's introduced a slightly less unsolvable sharpening problem of its own. And from my testing in other games, I found this over-sharpening can be reduced either by turning the sharpness slider down or by upping the resolution the game runs at. I've really tried to figure out the resolution that this footage was shot at. The before shots are clearly 4K but without anti-aliasing of any sort, while afterwards it looks like it's still 4K, but from the amount of fizzing and shimmering I can see, I'm going to hazard a guess and say this is 4K DLSS performance mode, so a base resolution of a rather low 1080p judging from the amount of fizz and pixelation around busy edges. Now I could be wrong, this is just a 1-minute YouTube teaser video I'm basing this all on after all. Probably the thing I'm most excited to see is all the AI-driven texture overhauls, which really shine in these before and afters. This is a feature in RTX Remix, and it doesn't just upscale the texture, but it also generates a normal and roughness map for them, which is all part of how modern textures appear more realistic than how Half-Life 2's rather flat, low-res looking ones did back in the day. We get a few high-res before and afters to play with, and you can definitely make out the much bumpier, more contrasty look of the upscaled ones. Though I always thought this was meant to be a dirty but smooth tile-like material, which in my opinion the upscaling is made to look too rocky. Valve, please fix. Just kidding, this is community made. I suspect a lot of these surfaces have had the human touch as well, like this wooden floor which no longer has that weird dripping paint pattern anymore. And it has a different placement of wooden knots, and every surface on this outside shot seems to have been given a 3D looking parallax effect, which sinks the details of the textures into the materials somewhat to give the illusion of depth, which I imagine must have required human oversight to be done properly. These cobbled floors are probably the most immediately obvious example of this new 3D effect, but I also think it overhauls the look of this corrugated iron wall, which now finally looks like how I imagined it should have done back in the day. This 3D effect also shades the stuff inside it realistically. So somehow they've got a 2D surface and have made it look 3D with 3D shading as well. Witchcraft. Check out this spot in the original Half-Life 2 version. Under these electrical lighting conditions it still looks shockingly good for a 20-year-old texture, but I can't wait to see what all the RTX goodness will do to this surface to improve it further. The only problem I can see with this 3D parallax effect will be how it will break the laws of physics in the very corners of spots using the effect, like along here, or here. What's crazy is that this effect existed back when Half-Life 2 first came out, though I don't believe Valve themselves ever used it in Half-Life 2. And then the last big change this remake adds is to the models, which have been redone to modern standards. This helps a lot on the grass and trees, which were always a bit primitive even back in Half-Life 2's day. We also get this nice table demonstration which shows a bunch of props being overhauled. But I think the earlier RTX trailer we got showed these new models better, bringing Kleiner's lab up to the present day. All in all, RTX Remix is doing wonders here, but the team behind the remaster deserves credit as well. Orbifold Studios are the ones who are doing 99% of the work on this, with Nvidia only providing support on how to use the Remix tools. Half-Life 2 RTX still has no official release date, but the RTX Remix tools go public on the 22nd of January, at which point the possibilities are endless. For instance, in their blog about this, Nvidia names some oddly specific titles. Hitman 2 is obviously awesome to see, but the one that really stands out to me is Vampire the Masquerade, which I've just realised is the perfect game to receive this kind of overhaul because, thanks to West 5 lovingly maintaining and patching it for nearly 20 years, and a proper sequel due later on this year, now is the perfect time for an RTX remix of the original game. All it needs now is a graphical overhaul to bring it up to modern day standards. So here's hoping that this is a hint that something's already in the works for this game, but the other titles would be awesome to see as well.